Hello everyone, my name's the Historical Gamer, and today I'm being joined by XTRG and Tortuga Power to discuss our Rule the Waves Succession live stream series, whatever you want to call it, that we did on YouTube. Ended, what, like 2 weeks ago or so? And it was a series where we each ruled France for 6 years, 6-year increments, and then passed the save off to the next person in line. It was a lot of fun. It was the first time I've ever done a Succession series. It's also the first time I've ever seen a Rule the Waves Succession series. And the nature of Rule the Waves, where you're designing ships and fighting wars with ships that you've had in service for several years, really makes some interesting challenges when you're not the all-seeing, omnipotent force behind all the ship designs. So it was a lot of fun. And I don't know if you guys want to say hi, XTRG or Tortuga.
Bonjour.
Yeah, what's going on, guys? Really happy to be here. I'm really excited about this because we can finally figure out what goes on in that crazy mind of the British XTRG.
I don't know, possibly. Some might say artistic, some might say autistic. It might be about 50-50.
So I think the first thing is, I don't know if any of you guys had any kind of thoughts coming into the series. I kind of thought that I would get more of my ships into service while I was playing, and I guess I should have known better that a huge dreadnought takes years to build, and I also should have figured that whoever was coming before me would probably not leave me in great financial shape. Although maybe XTRG had a better hand on finances than either Tortuga or myself, because I feel like whenever I was leaving office, there was like a negative $5 million budget for Tortuga to take over, but I certainly came flush with cash that second round with XTRG leaving it off to me. But I don't know if any of you guys had any thoughts coming into the series. I didn't really know what to expect, so I just was looking forward to it, and I thought it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I thought that, kind of arrogantly, I thought that this would be a good chance for me to impress other people with my designs. So I thought that, I'll build these ships, and then there'll be people will want to use them, and they'll model their designs after mine. And that was, I guess we'll talk about how our preconceptions were wrong later, but I think I expected not to learn very much from other people, and well, we'll talk about how that actually played out later. XRG?
Yeah, well, coming into the series, the last Rule the Wave series that I had done was one as Spain with the historical budget, and oh my god, when you come into a game and you're playing with the what do they call it, like the game budget? What is the other budget called? Is historical?
I think it's historical, isn't it?
Historical
resources, right?
Yeah, it's historical or game.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the second option, like game option, where you basically have like twice as much in the terms of resources, and it's like, wow, I have too much cash. What the hell do I do with all this cash? I can't just fire it out a 16-inch gun yet. I haven't researched that. So it was something that I did have to take in my stride. I'm used to playing nations with far smaller amounts of cash. But as well, due to the... I do have an interest in naval history. Obviously, as being an Englishman, it's kind of in your blood, in a way. But yeah, the thing I wanted to focus on most of my ship designs was just pure purpose. The battlecruisers I would go into design, yes, they were weird and possibly autistic, but they were all very quick. They had decent armor. They were not very, very well armored, but when you take a look at the historical battlecruisers, like, for example, the Lion battlecruiser, bloody Betty's battlecruiser, you see that thing wasn't that well armed. Something like 10 to 11 inches of armor, I do believe. I'd have to check that on Wikipedia. But you see, they're quick. They weren't exactly well armored, but they were really well armed, and that's something that I tried to put into the series. But the issues with RTW and just the way the combat works is, in the wars I had against Austria. Now, with Austria, due to the fact that they have just the one theater being the Mediterranean, it's easy for them to go out there and raid everywhere that you have holdings. But as the French going against them, you can't do anything like that. You're basically all in. And then you have all these raiders across the planet just plundering your lines. But that's something of a limitation of RTW.
Yeah,
But,
and I would say also to some extent, like you're talking about the ship design philosophy. You certainly model the British mindset if you think about it. If you were using British ships as kind of an example, and these fast, well armed, but not quite heavily armored ships. it's interesting because I kind of went the same route with some of my ships, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later. But even my massively armed ships weren't particularly well armored, or at least not as well armored as maybe Tortuga would have liked. You really like to put heavy armor on those conning towers.
Yeah, that's right. I like to
But
protect myself.
but I guess this probably leads nicely into kind of talking about what we thought maybe would happen, or what we thought some of the interesting challenges would have been from a gameplay perspective. So if we think about the world in 1900, which is when the game starts and when I took over. Now that the screen goes black, okay, I've got it up there. We were thinking about the world in 1900 when we took over as France. I guess the interesting challenge that I thought is I've played in Rule the Waves streams where you control and you create the initial fleet, but I don't think I've ever really done just a starting fleet that you start off with whatever the computer designs. And what I found interesting about that was, first of all, the computer makes some illegal ship designs. For example, I think it wasn't called the Fryland, but I had a corruption in my save where I had to, change some of the names so I could get everything back. But I think it was maybe the Ocean class. It had like 4 single gun turrets with 2 at midships, and it was just, I tried to go ahead and make more of them, and I couldn't because it was illegal. So it's interesting how the computer doesn't follow its own rules on ship design that it imposes on you. But I think the most interesting challenge for me was that difference between those early ships are not very lethal. You hit them with a torpedo and they're a goner, but deck fire and guns, the rate of fire is so slow, the accuracy so poor that you'll just sail around in circles, waste your entire magazine, and maybe you'll sink one enemy ship. And that was the biggest challenge I faced in fighting Italy, was just the inability to get decisive victories at sea, which is very, there's not a ton of examples of these kind of ships fighting in real life, but the few that you have in the Russo-Japanese War, that doesn't model what happened historically, although I think that was more to do with Japanese brilliance, tactically speaking, than it was great ship designs with really accurate weapons. And no one would ever say I'm a brilliant tactician. So, but it was interesting because I got to fight, Italy right off the bat in my first go through. We were able to seize some colonies from the Italians. We were able to seize Sardinia, despite not really crippling their fleet. Really, it was commerce raiding that was a big point for us. We were really able to kind of just ravage and gain the victory points without decisively defeating their fleet at any one point. And then I passed off a budget depleted France to Tortuga, who was able to continue the tradition of French greatness on. French greatness being that historically they've never won major naval wars, and we were embarking on a series of French dominance, the likes of which the world has never seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do remember starting off with a pretty small budget, I guess, was what was left for me, thanks to the historical gamer class, which was itself an interesting ship because we had this pre-dreadnought right at the cusp of being the dreadnoughts. The dreadnoughts coming into existence. Anyways, I just remember in my first tenure from 1906 to 1912, that's when we fought the Germans. Thank you. Bringing up the historical gamer class. So the historical gamer, that's probably one of the things we'll talk about later, is how designs impressed us and whatever. I was actually really impressed by the historical gamer. It held out really well in the German War. And right before I left office, after we had defeated the Germans, we had this, the Devastation class was really what I was hoping would be the legacy I would leave from my first tenure. And I'll just put the footnote in there because I'll talk about it more when I come back to my second tenure. And then I just like THG, just like Historical Gamer, I passed on a very poor budget to XTRG. But I was able to take, you were able to take our Sardinia, weren't you?
Yeah, I took Sardinia. I think that was all I got from Italy. I think the way the game handles seizing colonies with this point system works fine as long as you're just taking colonies. But if you're trying to take like mainland parts of an empire, which we'll probably come back to later when we talk about my second run through, there's some limitations there.
Yeah, it doesn't model the land war at all, obviously. So you don't know, like if France was fighting Germany, can you imagine like how much significance the naval war would be? It would be very, very insignificant, you know?
What are you talking about? They read Alfred Thayer Mahan, and then they made this game, and that's all that matters is sea power.
So, we still beat them. I don't know what happened on the land forces, but they were just, I guess, following in line with the naval powers.
We lost Paris, but we sunk a minesweeper. Huzzah!
Yeah, exactly.
Huzzah!
I think I did a pretty good job mopping up the German fleet. And then I sank a lot of money into these Devastation classes. Actually, was the Duquesne, I guess that was also made in my first tenure, which was...
You had a couple battle cruisers too, didn't you?
Yeah. The Duquesne battle cruiser, I think. I don't know how many I built, but maybe just one even. I think I just built the one.
I don't even remember how I'm trying to pull it up on the screen here, but I'm trying to find which one it was.
The Duquesne is DU, I think. That's it, yeah. So the Duquesne, I only built one because I don't think any of them ever sunk. Yeah. Anyway, so that was my last act, just so I could make sure XTRG had no budget to work with. And that is how I passed the game on to him.
Indeed. Right, so coming off the bat then, when I did start playing, we did have a solid amount of really good dreadnoughts. I mean, the Devastation class had been really nice. The THG class was awesome as well. So we had a lot of... But I mean, I always like the idea of the battle cruisers due to the fact it's something that's really, when you think about it, it's something that really shouldn't exist. I mean, what is the real reason behind a battle cruiser? It's like something that existed before the dreadnought. I mean, you have the dreadnoughts where these are just, well, ships that would end up being very fast later on, like a decade or 2 decades later, at the same sort of speed as a battle cruiser, heavily armed, heavily armored. And it's interesting. It's like with the battle cruiser, it was made to really hunt down armored cruisers, or these armored ships. What do they call them? Armored cruisers? I do believe that was the name, the designation for like basically heavy cruisers at the time. And the heavy cruiser itself was being phased out for the most part. It's one of those things of why would you settle for anything less than a dreadnought? If you could go for a dreadnought, you go for the dreadnought. So I went in and I wanted to do something different. So I went ahead and tried to design the abomination known as the Dunkirk. And it would have worked. It would have worked if it wasn't for those pesky kids and their design limitations. It was an idea of going... Was that AVG?
Yeah.
Don't worry, no one sees that. Although now they hear you talking about it.
What is this? What is this ship? We'll talk about designs later.
Yeah, so the idea behind the Dunkirk was the all guns forward sort of prophecy, which it did prove itself. It did sink another battle cruiser, I do believe, by chasing it down. I mean, it was a bloody fast ship for the time, 13 knots, 35,000 tons, so a pretty heavy ship. But it was a flawed ship. I mean, it had 10 inches of belt, which is not too bad. 2.5 deck, not bad. The turret top 5, turrets 15, heavily armored turrets. It was made to take a beating at the front. The issue, of course, is with the Rule the Waves combat system. You kind of start the battle, like, in touching distance. You're practically already there. Whereas, historically, you would find that combat would start rather differently. You would see the ship from a distance, and then you would try to close upon that ship. And then, in real life, it was a hell of a lot more tactical. I mean, if you've ever read any of the books or anything like that, you can see it was a hell of a lot more tactical affair. I mean, the sunlight would be taken into consideration, wind direction, lots of different things. So, this ship found it difficult. It wasn't really meant for mainline combat. It was meant to be a raider. It was meant to be in its own squadron supported by other fast-moving ships to hunt down the enemy's cruisers or vital ships and generally harass the enemy. And it would suffer in a war against the Hungarians, the Austro-Hungarians, I should say, where we were up against, 3 to 4, maybe 5 Austrian battle cruisers at once, and yeah, it just did not last. Though I'd like to say my favorite ship was probably, was it the Cosmo? I believe I did design, was a Cosmo in my first?
I think that was your second run. Because there was was it this one? 19, I don't know. We can talk about ship designs in a little bit, but I think, taking over from XTRG, who I know I gave you a lot of crap in the game, and I had you killed off because you had those crazy ship designs with all the guns in the front. But I will say that it was really nice in my second run through because I was able to come in with quite a healthy budget. And that was thanks in large part to XTRG not being an idiot and building, 40,000 ton ships that cost $8 million a turn, like me.
Scrapping.
But anyway, sorry, Tortuga. But my second run through was interesting because I kind of thought, oh, I'm going to have a chance to, fight someone different. And I ended up at war with Italy again. And it was an interesting challenge because almost all the ships that I was fighting with were ships that I had no say in. I didn't design them. I didn't, really have anything to do with the composition of the fleet when I came in. And I ended up building this, THG 2 class ship, which had gigantic guns, 17-inch guns, but I didn't, and I don't know if I had any secondaries, maybe a few, but I didn't actually really end up fighting with it much at all because the war was over. The biggest challenge or change, I think, for me, though, was between my first run through and my second run through. You went from the pre-dreadnought age to the advanced dreadnought age, or at least the beginning of the advanced dreadnought age. And the Italians largely were still sailing around with early dreadnoughts. And I would say that both Tortuga and XTRG ships performed really well against those ships. We basically obliterated Italy's battle fleet. Italy ended up suffering from having too many battle cruisers and not enough battleships. As a result, we were able to pound them into submission and sink, was it 7 or 8 battle cruisers in that war? And I think like 2 or 3 battleships. By the end of it, I think they had 4 capital ships left. Unfortunately, the way the game engine works is there was no real way for me to take Sicily, which I would have preferred. But in the end, we got Eritrea because that's all that Italy had left in terms of colonies. Of course, as soon as I handed it back over to Tortuga, the Italians got Rhodes. Or no, that was right after the war. I don't know if Tortuga was in power or if I was. They had some random event that let them take Rhodes, which would have been nice to have in our control. I wonder if the game felt bad that they didn't have any colonies. But yeah, it was an interesting run through. It was a decisive battle. It kind of mirrored the issues you were talking about, XTRG, where ships ended up in knife fight range before anything even happened. I had this crazy night battle where we were like 1,000 yards away from the enemy fleet with these modern battleships, and I think they lost 4 or 5 capital ships in that fight alone, mostly to torpedoes. Fortunately, we didn't lose too badly. I think we lost 1 ship in that fight. But it was an interesting challenge, and I ended up, I guess my legacy was just fighting Italy at all times, all the time. And I kind of feel bad because I'm part Italian, so. But then I handed it off to Tortuga, who made sure the Italians got their revenge.
Yeah, I guess they killed you, right? So it was technically part Italian, part British assassination group, and that's what led me to role play. Going after the British. I just kind of wanted to go after the big boys because I was pretty impressed with the fleet we had at that point, especially the THG 2 class ships. I was already happy with them, and they performed exceptionally well, except for against mines. We had an unfortunate sinking of one from hitting a mine. It's just devastating to lose like the most powerful ship you have in your fleet to a strategic event.
Yeah, which you have absolutely
no control. Yeah, and I even have minesweepers. I'm probably well known in this series for just mass producing minesweepers. Did either of you guys build a minesweeper?
Nope. No, you replaced all my destroyers with minesweepers.
That's right. Minesweepers is part of the Tortuga way. So yeah, I just, it was a little upsetting to lose a ship to a mine when you focus so much on minesweepers.
Do minesweepers play a role in the game? Like if you've got a bunch of them, does it lower the likelihood of striking a mine?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It does. They also help with anti-submarine warfare. So they're kind of like catch-all. That's why I like them so much. They seem to be very good as a strategic force. And they're incredibly cheap. Obviously, for anti-submarine warfare, you just want the cheapest ship that functions well. And minesweepers are just, you can make them 200 tons fully functional. So
that only covers coastal patrol, so you can have more destroyers out with the fleet.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So in this tenure from 1924 to 1930, we planned to go to war with England, and we did. And I was kind of scared, wondering what I had gotten myself into. But the ships all performed really well, and that's where I was really excited to see the reemergence of the Duquesne, who I don't know if you have that actions list where it shows. By the way, we have to give credit. I think it will take a moment here, and maybe several other times we should thank Incompetent Idiot, who's currently that's a name,
Not an insult.
He's the one who made a lot of these graphics, and he put together these spreadsheets. So, yeah, I was even going to say you could look at that. That would be perfect.
We sank a lot of British ships.
So the British suffered heavily at the hands of Admiral Turtle Power. I guess I called him Turtle Power instead of Tortuga Power. Also, there's another. Do you have the Navarez de la Marine Nationale, whatever spreadsheet? It doesn't matter.
Off screen, but
yeah, fine. It doesn't matter. I'll just say the Duquesne was the ship involved in the most number of actions, 17. And I don't think you can really say that being involved in the most number of actions is proof of a good ship, but it's a correlated factor, right? So it just kept reappearing because you have battle cruisers in fleet battles and also in cruiser actions. So yeah, Z to A, there it is. So the Duquesne, it was really nice to see the Duquesne back, actually, because it was just a ship that I built in my first tenure, and the way XTRG was designing ships and everything, I wasn't sure if she'd be around.
The Duquesne class in of itself had the 3 most heavily engaged.
Oh, no, so this sorting didn't work. The Naufrage, the Abeille Tous, and the Devastation, and the Algérie, I think, were all Devastation class.
Wow. Okay, well, fine.
Yeah, it didn't link. It somehow didn't link, so it doesn't matter. Okay, so then we beat the British. I designed what I feel, and we'll talk about this more later, is the best ship I've ever made in this game, which was the La France, if that one's up there. And this was intended to be a very strong dreadnought, but very cost effective. So the cost for it, if I can pull up, let me see, the specification sheet. The cost of it was in total
151 million.
Exactly, which was actually 2 million cheaper than the Historical Gamer 2 class ship. Same tonnage.
That's because we used better metals in our ship.
6 years prior, right?
A little bit of gold engraving in the admiral's cabin.
That's right. Although the conning towers was surprisingly weak, right? You had what I can't remember, 12-inch conning tower.
You know,
I always keep my conning tower really heavy.
You really have this thing about the conning tower. You just love conning tower armor.
Yeah, I want to feel nice and safe in there.
What do you think he sleeps besides at night? I mean, he's got to have his conning tower. Otherwise, he can't sleep.
He doesn't feel safe unless he's got 17 inches of armor around him at all times.
Oh, I know he has 17 inches, but I don't know about armor.
Oh God! Oh boy. So this was I think my favorite design. We'll talk about favorite designs later, but I built this, and then that is where I wanted this to be like the legacy, because France defeating Britain, I think, is like a huge thing, right? It never happened. It was always a thing where the French were contesting the British for like 200 years, and then they never overcame them. We had Trafalgar, right? So all these bad things for the French, and finally this is the French victory. And unfortunately, at the end of that, even though I think I was up like 200,000 victory points to 60,000, there was no colonies gained. And I was very upset by that. Quite upset. Anyway, we didn't get any colonies, so the world map did not update with the Treaty of London or whatever it would have been. But I did put this La France ship, I designed it as like the victory piece of that war. And that is how I passed it over to XTRG, who subsequently mauled it.
Indeed. So my last tenure, my second tenure was I was almost expecting to be at war at any moment. I was like sort of gearing towards war with America, but then when it came to it, I was like looking at war with Italy, and then Austria was getting uppity, and then the British getting uppity, and it's like, oh Jesus Christ, it's getting too real too quickly. And you could say it's got a little much. But I was trying to make amends for my past sins by designing something that was actually worth a goddamn. And I did take a look at the Devastation class, and I did think what could be improved and modernized. So I did make a modernized version. What was it the Marengo? I think it was the
I think it was the Empire, wasn't it?
Ah, yeah, the Empire class, the one I forgot about within 5 minutes.
That we should forget about.
Yeah. This was before I was made painfully aware of how bad 18-inch guns are. I assumed that the game would not be bugged in such a way, but the basic thing is with 18-inch guns, isn't it that their quality never improves, and that's basically the best you're going to get?
I think that's something I didn't know that myself, but I know that there's some kind of bug with 18 inches that we were made aware of.
Yeah.
Apparently, there's
But
such a
other than
thing as
that-
too big.
It's never too big. But basically, I still think it's a fantastic ship. It's actually decent. If I would have reduced, well, if I'd have known about the 18 inches, I could have made them smaller to the 17s. And I mean, the ship as it is now, I mean, 4 torpedo defense, that's a bloody luxury. My men are lucky if they even have a fucking hull at the end of the day. But yeah, the secondaries, good. Tertiaries. Who even has tertiaries? That's a bloody luxury too. Oil firepowered, I mean...
It would do well in the age of air combat if because you had tertiary guns that were 5-inch guns, and that's what a lot of the U.S. ships in World War II used as like flak guns. They were kind of general purpose anti-ship and anti-air.
I mean, when it comes to air war, we could also just put some giant wings on it and just see how it does in the air. Who knows?
It was actually cheaper than your La France class as well.
Yeah,
was it? Oh yes.
$2 million cheaper.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, how does that feel? Does that keep you up at night?
Anyway, so at the end of the day, I think we did pretty well as France. I mean, we ended up expanding the empire quite substantially. We were able to gain Sardinia, so we have both Corsica and Sardinia. We got Eritrea. I'm trying to think of the other areas we conquered. We definitely took some territory from Germany. I think it looks like we got their southwest and East African colonies. I don't know what else we took. Maybe it looks like we took their... No, we didn't take Cameroon. But, we certainly expanded France quite a bit. And Sardinia probably would remain part of France today, even with all the, decolonialization efforts that would occur later in history. So France remains a world part of this day, thanks to myself, XTRG, and Tortuga Power. We kind of talked about it a little bit already, about kind of our favorite designs or preconceived notions, but did any of you have anything you wanted to call out as far as like, wow, this really surprised me? I know in my situation, I thought the thing that kind of surprised me the most was just the stupidity of the Italians, where their fleet was outnumbered when they went to war. They tried to almost go to war with me again. I think you kind of pacified them a bit, Tortuga, during your reign. But after I had crushed them, they came back and wanted to start going to war again, even though they basically had no navy left. The AI could probably use a little bit better decision making in terms of who's going to fight. I think it's a little bit randomized. And what I'd really like to see, I know they're working on a second Rule the Waves. I say they, but I think it's one guy. What I'd really like to see is a little bit of influence over naval and land actions. So, like, if you're going to invade Sicily or if you're going to invade some colony in a war, the Navy should probably know about it before some random event fires and says, oh, by the way, troops have landed here. And then I think one other thing that would be nice to see, and I guess this isn't what I was surprised by, but one other thing that would be nice to see is some level of tactics or strategy that you dictate to your fleet. So you put fleets in certain areas, but the fact that fleet combat happens is completely random. You'd think you'd be able to tell Betty, hey, I want you to be really aggressive and go out and try and initiate a fleet action. Or, hey, I want you to just kind of do a far-off blockade or whatever. You should have some control over the kind of actions that occur.
An order of battle. An order of battle would be amazing. Being able to dictate which ships are in which squadrons. Oh, my God.
Yeah, that would be useful.
Yeah, that too. But also, like, again, like if you're really supposed to be the admiral in command of everything, you should have some say in the kind of campaigns that you fight, right? Like the overall strategy.
Like choosing whether to approach their ports or not. Is that what you're talking about?
Sure, yeah. Or is like if you're playing as Germany and you're blockaded, you should have the ability, like, I want my fleet this turn to go out and try and break the blockade and initiate a fleet action if necessary. Yeah. Or, something like that.
I agree. I want to talk about a few designs, if you don't mind. First of all, maybe I'll do this compliment sandwich thing because I want to look at first the Cosmo. Can you bring up the Cosmo?
Which one?
any of them was fine. The original, maybe.
The original.
So this is from XTRG's first tenure, and I have never built a light cruiser with more than 6-inch guns. And I also almost never, I think basically never use lower tier gun, like main to secondary or secondary to tertiary, which is in very close proximity to the caliber of the previous gun. So what he had here is a 7-inch guns for his main, a ton of them, and then also 6-inch guns for his secondary, which I always thought was like a no-no, because there is a combat penalty for firing different caliber shells at the same ship. So I didn't like this design when I first saw it, but this design was remarkably good. And I'm probably going to try to adopt something like this. I don't know how I will make it in my games, but considering this thing functioned, like every time there was a cruiser engagement with this ship against any other ship, I just beelined right towards the enemy ship and we sank it and we won. No problems every single time with the Cosmo. So I was very impressed by this design. This is probably the design that influenced me the most in this series, was this one. Now, I also want to take a look at, we somehow avoided looking at the Tourville. I think the Tourville is the 15,000 ton one. Is that?
Yes.
What?
Oh, yeah, this was the one I tried to engage the main French battleships with and didn't really think maybe 6 main guns might not be sufficient.
Yeah, I think this was a little bit strange. One of the things I want to ask XTRG about, kind of call him out on this on camera maybe, is what is your obsession or interest in having a center turret, a midship turret, which has no advantages of firing arc, but it's actually, the way you have it done here, if we were to redesign this, so okay, let's just look at the tonnage here is 13,835. If you go ahead and delete that midship and increase the turret of the aft, just pretend like we're making a new ship, and we'll look at 1835 and we'll see what happens. Not the caliber, just the right click and it'll say increase guns. And then drop the midship, delete the midship. So this is now, it was cheaper, right? I mean, this is cheaper than having the midship gun. And the firing arc, if you update the firing arc as well, is better because the aft firing guns can fire everywhere the midship can, but the midship can't fire rear. So XTRG, I'm just curious, what is your interest?
I see this gap right here for torpedoes to come in and just like blow the ship in half. Just saying.
Oh, right. Yeah, we need a main gun which fires at torpedoes.
Exactly.
I'm curious. Go ahead. Your floor is yours.
Well, it's a fantastic place to hoist a flag. I mean, where else are you going to put that flag? It's like, the thing is, the all guns forward concept just doesn't quite work out in RTW. Sorry, it just doesn't quite work. But the idea of the middle gun was basically, there's no zones where we're lacking firepower. And you can see here the fire arcs, yes, they cover that. But you need firepower. And I like the midship guns. I just think they always look nice. I mean, what is the Japanese design? What was it now? Is it the Hyuga? The Hyuga with the 5 guns? Is it 5 or 6 guns? Trying to recall the name of it now. I think it was the Hyuga. But basically, it was one of these Japanese battleships that had, was it a Haruga? I think it was Haruga, actually. That had something like 6 guns. God damn it, I should have done this research beforehand. But basically, I like the concept of the midship gun. I just like the fact that you just have something in the center there. So even if you're doing a extreme turn, and your aft gun can't fire, or your aft gun's knocked out, you still have something there. Because the midship gun, I don't know if it is a natural thing or not, it just seems a hell of a lot harder for it to be taken out just because of like the location of it. It's over the citadel of the ship, so theoretically would be the most armored part of the ship. I don't know, it's something different. Why not different?
I think this is a good answer, though. You did a lot of things which were really, really different. And that was like kind of the idea of this Succession series, was like, let's combine 3 different people, have 3 different minds looking at the problem 3 different ways. And we can all, hopefully, through the combat experience that each of these ships then goes through, suss out which of the ship designs is like a good one or not. So Okay.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't mind the middle turret. I think the middle turret is more useful when you're a little bit earlier in technology and you don't have all the super firing turrets yet. If you look at, a lot of the battleship designs, which I think a lot of us kind of avoided, those early dreadnoughts where you had the wing turrets or whatnot because they couldn't figure out, I think it might have been a center of gravity thing, but putting the turrets all on the center line, those middle turrets are really valuable because at that point then you can fire in either direction and you don't need a turret on each wing, which I don't think, maybe we avoided in this game. But the middle turret was a very, like a real historical thing during the early Dreadnought era anyway that had value. Even before the Dreadnought era, I think it was the German, was it the Brandenburg class, which had, a 1 1 aft turret and then had a center turret. It had a different caliber because the guns had to be shorter to be able to swing back and forth through the middle of the ship. But it was, it allowed the Germans to have a pre-dreadnought ship with 6 main guns as opposed to 4 like everybody else. I think it's a really interesting idea. And I do think as long as you don't get your T crossed, or as long as you're not trying to run from an enemy, which are two, certainly scenarios you need to account for, it's superior to most other ships, barring a center firing, super firing turret.
Yeah, that might also play into what XTRG was saying earlier, that we start combat so close that crossing the T isn't really a thing. Everyone's just, or sometimes the combat situations in this. I'll just let you say it again, XTRG. Would you say that your midship firing turret would be better in maybe a more realistic simulation?
Well, in a realistic situation, I mean, the smoke sort of thing. It's like, let's take a look at the, what was the engagement now? It was part of the Battle of Jutland, like one of the early engagements, but where you had the British battle cruisers chasing down the German battle cruisers.
Dodger Bank.
Yeah, that'll be it. Was it the Blucher? Oh, which one was it now?
The Blucher was destroyed, and I mean, the interesting thing is with Dodger Bank is all of the German ships had a lot of their turrets knocked out. So that at one point they basically had no firepower going backwards as they were trying to run away. And that, gave the British quite a bit of an advantage. The Blucher wasn't really... It's interesting when you talk about the armored cruiser and the battle cruiser being designed to hunt down the armored cruisers. I kind of made a video a while back that was talking about how really the battle cruiser was not revolutionary in any way. It was just a further development of the armor cruiser, and the Blucher really kind of shows that off because it was this hybrid of what they thought the British were designing with their battle cruisers, where it had like 14 8-inch guns and really heavy armor. It just wasn't as fast. Which, if you look at some of the British British armored cruisers before, they had 10, 11-inch guns. They just didn't have as many of them. And I think it was just taking the dreadnought idea and taking the cruiser and evolving it into that. It wasn't that revolutionary, in my opinion.
No, I mean, you see this quite a lot. I mean, with the real life examples, like the British tended to favor like high caliber guns, while the Germans tended to favor lower caliber guns, but they had an increased amount of them. I mean, the Battle of the Battle of Coral Sea with the Germans under von Spee? They had
Falklands or Coronel, one or the other.
Both really. Well, I'd say Coronel, not Falklands. Falklands was really where von Spee had it coming with the battle cruiser being present there. Lucky bastard.
He had it coming.
Aye, but at the Battle of the Coral Sea, like, you see the fact that the British did tend to have high caliber guns, but they had less of them. So when they did hit, they did cause some horrendous damage. But the fact is, the Germans just had the weight of firepower, and that really did show.
The Germans also had better, like, they had lower caliber guns, but they had much higher muzzle velocities on them, so they were relatively comparable.
And reliable shells, or more reliable shells, which was something that was seen really at Jutland, just how unreliable the British shells were.
Yeah, I'm just looking through. Is this the ESA? Let's just throw this on the screen. This is one of them that had, like, kind of a center.
Oh, yeah, there we go. It's like, say the ship is being chased and is going forwards, but the enemy's to the rear. Now, you'd only be able to fire the aft guns, wouldn't you? But if you were to take a course that was moving towards the port or starboard, you could maneuver the ship into such a position where you could bring the aft guns to start fire. Sorry, the center guns to start firing along with the aft guns. Now, the forward guns are just inconsequential at that moment. You can't do anything to bring them into the fight. You could turn the ship to bring them into the fight, but then you're basically turned towards the enemy or abreast to the enemy. So the centerline guns did have a lot of uses. They were more. It's just like weight of shells, really. Weight of metal downrange. And just slight tactical bonuses that you could bring if RTW was a little bit more tactical.
I noticed this trend. You like to blame the game for your ship design failures.
I can't blame myself, can
I? So I think my favorite chip design was the THG2, and I know my conning tower and my turret armor was a little bit light. I'm actually going to do what you were just doing and blame the game. The interesting thing I thought is my ships tended to be a little bit under armored. I think I kind of adopted a slightly modified British outlook, not quite as extreme maybe as Tortuga, but not quite as armor up as like Germany did historically. I think a lot of my ship designs I would look at. I've got this great book on battle cruisers. I forget, it's near me somewhere, but it's like 300 pages, and it talks about the 9 German World War I battle cruisers, and it has 3D renderings of what the ships look like and all of that. And I use that a lot in designing my ships, but I also based my ships on historical designs, tended to upgun them a bit. But it's interesting, if you look at the historical designs, this belt armor here, 12 inches, may not seem a lot, but it's actually comparable to a lot of the American battleships in World War II. What is different is the turrets tended to be like 18 or 19 inches of armor, and the game doesn't let you get as high in turret armor as historically was the case. Like, there were ships that had 20 inches of turret armor. The same for the conning towers. So I kind of accepted the limitations there and just said, all right, my belt's going to be relatively comparable. I'm going to go with heavier guns than historically was the case for most ships, and I'm just going to bury them with weight of firepower. I'm going to trust that I'm going to be able to engage far enough out that really the armor that'll matter is the belt. Unless I get unlucky and, a shell hits my conning tower, whatever, I'll take that as a risk. That I'm not going to get a direct hit on my conning tower. Because even with 17-inch guns, well, 17-inch guns might be the wrong ones to look at because you can penetrate everything at every... Like, if I jump my conning tower up to 15 inches, that's not going to matter unless it's just an extreme range, engagement. At 12,000 yards, that's not going to matter. Everything's going to get penetrated. And even if you drop that down to like a more realistic computer design, 16 inches of armor, unless I go really heavy in like 15, 16 inches of armor, even 16 inches of armor at 20,000 yards, it doesn't matter. You're going to have your armor penetrated. So, as you get into these more advanced ships with these heavier guns, I just went with the mantra of firepower beats all, and armor only matters in extreme range situations. And I kept finding myself in short range engagements. So better to get on top of them and obliterate them with firepower, because the extra armor is not gonna pay off, in my opinion.
I really follow the same kind of thing, actually. I really like glass cannon ships because, actually, to some degree, it seems like displacement itself is... if you have a big ship, it's just harder to sink it. It's a lot of tonnage to sink. You have to put a lot of holes in a bigger ship than you do in a smaller ship. So I kind of use displacement as my armor. That's kind of the theme I've been going towards lately. And the only things I want to protect are turrets, because those can lead to a flash fire, which instantly kills your ship.
Did we have any flash fires, though? Interestingly enough, I just was thinking about that. I know I hit a couple Italian ships that had flash fires, but did any of our ships end up having flash fires?
I don't think there was any French ships that had flash fires.
Yeah, that's right.
No, we
keep our powder dry.
Generally don't, but the British have a problem with this.
Yeah. Well, that one came from the, I'd say, discipline of the crew. Like at Jutland, they were they were meant to close the doors to like the ammo storage, but they would leave them open just to be able to get the ammunition
a little bit faster.
Through. Yeah,
yeah.
Well, they were trained to be machine gunners, not aiming their shots.
That was a tradition from Trafalgar, where you had the rate of fire. Like, the British rate of fire was incredible for the time.
Mm-hmm.
Just absolutely incredible. And you can see that really played on throughout the entirety of the Royal Navy's history. I don't know if it really plays out much today. I don't think it's really something that can be said. With the automated loading, etc. It's not something like you have somebody like throwing a shell in there. But rate of fire was definitely a part of the Royal Navy's heritage.
And I might have lost one of my cruisers to a flash fire now that I think about it. It might have been either I'm thinking it might have been the Le Touche de Treville, but one of those early kind of quasi-battleship cruisers that I built that had, huge secondary armaments. It wasn't this one. I think there was a different design. I can't remember it, but I think you guys were a little bit off put by my cruisers basically costing as much as battleships. But the interesting thing is early in the game, the design limitations that you have on battleships also almost makes heavy cruisers more valuable because you can make them faster, you can make them basically just as big, and the secondary armaments to me seem to have less of a limitation where you can have massive secondaries. The main limitation is just that main gun caliber. I mean, you could make it a little bit bigger, but I think the cruisers in the early war are actually more valuable than people give it credit to in this game.
Oh yeah, but it's like if you lose the cruiser, it doesn't matter as much as battleship.
Yeah, I think with that, it seems like the armored cruisers are pulled into conflicts more often, so they have a greater weight assigned to them than just like being an armored cruiser versus a dreadnought or a battleship.
Yeah, and I think one other thing is, for a while, I kind of wanted to go the Tirpitz route and just, like, a ship's design is to stay afloat. So build a super armored ship and make a little bit weaker guns. But I had a few bad experiences when I played in one-on-one games like Spain, where Spain already starts off with crappy heavy guns to begin with. So I kind of went with this mantra of armor over firepower. And I think, especially in the pre-Dreadnought era, that does not work. Like, I hit Italian ships. I was in a war with Italy. I hit them over and over again. But it did no damage because there were like 9 or 10-inch shells, and the enemy was hitting me, and it was just like literally sailing around until you ran out of ammo and then sail back, and they seemed completely ineffectual. So I kind of went with that heavier firepower route versus heavier armor route.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that that's why I build glass cannon. I have the same experience. Building really heavily armored ships doesn't seem to be nearly as effective as just destroying the other ship faster.
Yeah. But I don't know. What did you want to jump into Q&A at this point, or did either of you want to talk about any designs that you hadn't we kind of jumped into, we already sort of talked about things we learned, but did either of you have a design you wanted to highlight before we jump into Q&A?
Yeah, let's just take a look at the Gamer Aléatoire, just because it's probably the most devastating ship I've ever built.
The Gamer Aléatoire?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's I guess this is supposed to be my bad French translation of random gamer. Anyway, the interesting thing I've been going towards lately with ship designs is like this 4-2-2-4, but I'm not sure if it's maybe better to do 3-3-3-3. It's a debate. Anyway, I wanted to point out this ship because unfortunately it didn't actually see action, but that's it. That's all I wanted to say about it.
I just wanted to show you my great design.
It would have worked well if XTRG had gone to war.
That's true.
That pacifist jerk.
Yeah. Somebody's got to be at peace.
Says no one.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so can we talk about the Dunkirk again, actually?
Sure.
So there's one more thing I want to bring up about the Dunkirk. Right, okay. So if you take a look at the speed there, like, this ship was 30 knots. Now, what year did I design this ship? Was it... it was very early. I think it was like... Was it...
Does it tell you?
Yeah.
I don't think it...
actually, I can... remember that, actually. Does it tell you when it was built? Is it in the almanac?
The Dunkirk was 1913. I think that's the design year.
Yeah. So you take a look at that. So 13 knots in 1913. That's bloody fast for a ship carrying decent caliber guns. Now, the sort of mantra that I wanted to go for was basically speed. The issue, I know you're going to get me for blaming the game, but you start in knife fighting range. Now, speed usually dictates the combat. I did find in the battles I did fight, but it's difficult if you're slower than the enemy. If you're slower, it's ridiculously difficult to bring them to battle. If they're weaker ship but they're faster, they can just go. It doesn't matter if they're 1 knot faster. That 1 knot will tell in distance. So I wanted to design a ship but was able to bring firepower and bring it there quickly, but also have the speed to get in and out of engagements. And I was fairly proud of that. I was happy to have a fast ship. That was something I wanted, fast ships.
I think you did a better job of it than me, because when my design philosophy with my cruisers, more so than my battleships, was that, listen, odds are, as France, there's a good likelihood we'll end up at war with England, and we can't go toe-to-toe with them. So we need ships that are fast enough that even if they take a little bit of damage, they'll be able to outrun the enemy. Didn't do a good enough job of kind of scouting out what opposing fleets' speeds were. I think the computer gives a little bit more weight to speed than maybe I do. So I didn't end up designing ships that were fast enough. I think I ended up designing ships that were too well armed or armored, and I sacrificed speed. But at least my mentality of what I wanted was I wanted to try and have ships that were always near the top of the speed range. Maybe not out-distancing or being faster than everything on the seas, but at least fast enough where they could get into a chase and get away. And I don't think I did a very good job of that, but I certainly thought about it when I was designing my ships.
I actually have an interesting topic to bring up for all of us. Something which maybe you changed during the course of this series, Historical Gamer. Secondary turret armament or armor. I always put mine down to just 2, just the minimum that keeps them from being destroyed by splinters. But let's see, like maybe go to.
This was one of my early ships. Although I didn't have turrets on it, so maybe it's a different design.
This is good. This is still secondaries were 3.5 on this one, right? So
yeah.
This already shows like you put secondaries to 3.5, but I noticed by the end you were dropping the secondaries down to 2. And I noticed that XTRG, you always keep your secondaries very high at 6 in that last example. So this one, for example, had secondaries of 2. And you also, let's see, XTRG had in his final ship, the one we were just looking at, I forget.
Was it the Marengo? It had another name, didn't it? What was that name? Was it a Marengo? Magenta.
They all have 6. No, Magenta.
Magenta was the 18-inch one.
So this one only had secondaries of 4, but in the previous battle cruiser that we were looking at was at the Dunkirk. That one had secondaries of 6. So I'm just curious, why do you like to have such heavy secondaries? And also curious, Historical Gamer, what was your philosophy with reducing the secondary turret armor?
Well, let's let XTRG answer his first, and then I'll take it.
Give you time to think. Good. Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things like with these secondaries. I've had some terrible experiences in the past where lucky hits has just absolutely annihilated the ship by hitting the secondaries and causing a flash fire, which is odd. I don't even think that is a thing in these versions anymore, but that happened. And it's just...
Oh, it still can happen. I've sunk enemy ships this way, but I've never gotten one sunk, so I still roll the dice with low secondary armor.
I don't know. I just feel that 6 inches is a good solid amount. It's just something where it's going to definitely prevent splinters. And when you're in secondary range with other ships, I mean, you have the main guns that are firing at the ship, of course. But then when you get into secondary ranges with the enemy ships, you're noticing that they have huge amounts of secondary and tertiary guns. So your secondaries are getting hit by multiple shells. They might not be large shells, but they're getting hit by multiple shells after multiple shells. So you imagine the percentage chance of a critical hit increases as time goes on with the amount of shells being fired. So I kind of go for a up-armored secondary doctrine, and I don't think it hurt me. I was able to design around that limitation.
Okay, interesting.
Well, and I think for me, I know you said my mentality may have changed, and I think you're right, but I think mine was more of a different technology mindset. So when you're looking at early warships, you're looking at pre-dreadnought era ships, I think you need heavier secondary armament because those secondary guns are much more important to your total firepower than later guns or later ships. So like if we look at, I'm going to say, this may be a bad example, but the Historical Gamer class. So I had 7-inch secondaries there, right? And
in this sense, it made more sense though because these are 10-inch guns.
Right. So, but that's my overall mentality. Is like even with my Tours class, which are 8-inch guns and 6-inch guns, the difference there is so minimal that those secondary batteries can make a big difference in a cruiser engagement, or in this case, in a battleship engagement. 10-inch guns can make a big difference. So you need to protect those because you've only got 2 main guns. So those secondaries are really important to your overall firepower. On the other hand, when you're looking at something that's firing, a 17-inch shell, the secondaries are much less important relatively because the difference between your primary armament and your secondary armament is so much bigger when you're looking at, the THG2 class, where you've got 4-inch guns as your secondaries and you've got 17-inch guns as your main. So I think it's really just the relative percentage of your firepower that you allocate to your secondaries influences how important the armor is on those secondaries. That's my overall mindset. Now, admittedly, I think maybe you guys play a little bit differently, but I enjoy playing Rule the Waves not from a min-max standpoint. I know a lot of strategy gamers kind of min-max and see like what's the most you can possibly do, and I like playing with limited information personally and making mistakes. To me, it feels more like an authentic experience. Everybody's looking for different things, but for me, I don't like. I know sometimes people are going in looking at gun data to decide what's the armor. I just kind of design ships that feel right. And my mentality when I'm building those secondaries and they're only a 2-inch difference from the main gun is that, it should theoretically, in my mind, be important. I don't know if that's how the game treats it, but that's, I think a ship designer in 1900 would think that. And then, you let results figure things out and you learn from there.
Yeah, that was part of the point of this series even, was just to have a bunch of people designing different ships, because that's more how it is in real life.
Maybe
always
back
get
then, not today, that's for sure. Like today,
Yeah.
You've got all these computer models. You're going to figure everything out of every possible scenario. Whereas like back then,
It was all by feel.
Right. I mean, you had some assumptions, but you couldn't validate them in the same way that you can today, right?
Yeah, I agree. So it's kind of nice to introduce that randomness back into the system, because yeah, I do that. I min-max a lot. It takes away a little bit of the surprise. I mean, the whole era that we're in here, the 1900s to 1930s, was basically like insane technological advancements, where that you didn't know which technological advancement was going to be good. That's where we had this really terrible 13-inch guns from the Brits, right? And they didn't know that they were going to be terrible, otherwise they wouldn't have put them on. So
The 13.5-inch.
was that it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what they were. That was like on the line
the early
class, right?
1900s.
Yeah, they had some really interesting guns.
But
So-
they were also going on the metric, sort of millimeter system, weren't they technically? So were they thinking it was 13.5? Or were they
I don't
thinking
know, I
it's
just
like
remember that-
290 millimeters? And just from an American-centric view, it's like, oh, that converts out to a really weird caliber. Because Americans are the best at everything. Get out of here, XTRG.
System.
Oh, I know. Yeah, it's gonna take my ball and go home.
Did you guys want to talk about any other designs, or did you want to jump into some Q&A?
I have a question. Well, I have a question for me, so
Q&A.
yeah.
XTRG is the first question.
What's Rule the Waves?
Yeah.
What's this blue thing in the map? It's not land. I can't walk on it. I'm going to assume it's water. Anyway, right. So the question. Now this is from Taranyan. What are your views on submarines in the game? Right. Well, it's interesting when it comes to submarines. It's like you take a look at the conflict, like the American Civil War. You see that the Confederates were outnumbered, heavily outnumbered. Now the Union fleet wasn't really anywhere near sufficient enough in numbers to patrol or even enforce a total blockade, which is pretty funny. Like you had this blockade, and yeah, it's interesting. It was never truly a full blockade, but the Americans said, yeah, this is a blockade, and as long as you could try and prove that you were trying to enforce a blockade, it was considered a true blockade and therefore legal. Well, yeah, kind of. Let's not get into the details, but yeah, you had the numerically inferior and in terms of quality inferior Confederate Navy. So they went out of the box. They came up with the first submarines. Am I correct in saying that the first submarine was a Confederate design?
I mean, technically, I think the first submarine goes back to like the Revolutionary War, but the first real submarine was the Hunley, which was the Confederates. Yeah.
Yeah, didn't it go out 3 times and it sank on the 3rd time?
Something like that. Yeah, I think it didn't. Did it sink a ship and sank while it sank the ship? I'm not an expert in it, but
I mean, that was a lot of ships at that time, right? A lot of ships during the Civil War suffered more like sinking problems than actual damage problems from enemy fire.
yeah, but it did. At the end of the day, it did sink. And I know I think they pulled it up or part of it up like a couple of years ago, but it sank I want to say a Union screw sloop. I think it was called the Houstonic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure they went through 2 crews and then the last crew was unfortunate. But yeah, you take a look at that sort of thing where the Confederates are using something that's practically revolutionary, and that's what I've always liked about the submarines. It's like you saw in the Second World War, like how dangerous they could be and the psychological impact of a submarine. I mean, they are fairly lightweight ships to produce. I mean, they're fairly easy to produce. So I wanted to get as many as I could out there because they're wild cards in Rule the Waves. They are really wild cards.
They played a
They
big
can,
part in my win against my first, I think it was, no, my second win against Italy, is that constant drain on Italian shipping and victory points really can play a big role in these games. Sometimes too much, I think. The game doesn't do a great job of figuring out like what nations have a lot of commerce versus others. So like if you're Austria, I don't know how important, losing a few merchants should really be, but they definitely, the game models them well. And to your point, this is a really interesting era of ship design, especially for submarines, where they go from being like a mix of gasoline fired, petrol fired, to diesel, like the different designs of how there were steam powered submarines at one point in this era, and they were a nightmare to be on and would roast their crews, but it was a really interesting era. I read a American book about the American submarine war against Japan in World War II called Silent Victory, and it dedicates like 100 or so pages to sort of the submarine development leading up to World War I, really. And this era obviously covers that, and it's a fascinating story of technological development, which, to your point, yeah, I think the game does a good job. I think it would be interesting if you could actually design the submarines.
Oh god, that'd be amazing.
Well, if we can go to the almanac, even we can look at one of the problems with submarines in this game, which is just how the AI uses them. If you scroll down to the very bottom, well, I'm sure we'll find that Italy has over 100. Great Britain has close to 100. What happens is the game just, I know that there's historical basis for this. The AI builds a ton of submarines if they lose a war. And you can get this into insane levels. And submarines are extremely effective in this game. You can do, I think I did one time a American Civil War, the Confederate playthrough, just building submarines. My idea was just to win by submarines, and it was very effective. I didn't win until like the mid 1910s because submarines aren't effective until then. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, submarines, Germany was more successful in World War I with submarines than they were in World War II.
World War I, they definitely were, yeah.
Yeah, on like a raw tonnage scale or something. I don't know. I mean, it depends on how you define successful anyway.
But, the same author who wrote that Silent Victory book has a 2-volume history on World War II submarine war. I'm just starting to read it. But at the end of the day, his thesis is the Germans were never really that close to winning by subs in World War II. And, a lot of the success against them wasn't publicized for, propaganda and war fighting reasons. They didn't want to tell the Germans how, they were actually, not that they were doing great even during the happy times, but it never really got to the crisis level that it did in World War I.
Right. So I think that it's the only reason why I don't focus on it in this game is just because it's boring, right? There's just a strategic level, and you don't do anything. Like, you see submarines sometimes in the tactical maps. Sometimes I've even had, I think, one time in my entire lifespan of playing Rule the Waves, whatever, over a year and a half of playing Rule the Waves, I think I've only seen them launch torpedoes from a submarine at me on the tactical map one time. So they're not really exciting to use. In that Confederate States of America playthrough when I did submarines, the reason why I was doing them is because it makes that you can decline every tactical battle. I wanted to do an entire 25-year playthrough in 2 hours. And in order to do that, you just can't fight any tactical battles. So I was just declining everything and trying to only use submarines to gain victory. And so they're effective. What do I think about them? They're not very fun.
I also kind of wish that the game gave an auto-resolve feature for battles, because sometimes during wars it's just like, listen, I don't want to fight every single battle. It'd be nice to have
Completely agree. I even started coding my own auto-resolve thing, but it's a project that's collecting dust at this point.
That's why I got a few comments in the series like, "Whoa, why didn't you? You really blew through that battle." And it's like, yeah, I didn't want to fight 6 straight cruiser actions against Italy when they had no battleships left. I just wanted the war to end.
I couldn't agree with you more. I really couldn't agree with you more. I think the focus of this game is supposed to be, let's make Steam and Iron, which is just purely a tactical game, with a campaign element. But I think a lot of people enjoy the strategic elements of this more than they enjoy the tactical battles.
It's a more interesting, to me, it's a more interesting piece of being like, you're Tirpitz. You're not Jellicoe. You're not going to sail out with the fleet and fight it tactically. You can, that's fine. But to me, the whole concept behind the Rule of the Waves is it's a grand strategy Admiral Sim where you get to design your fleet. You get to be Jackie Fisher. You get to be Tirpitz. And the tactical resolution is fine. I'm okay with it being included, but it's a separate game, to your point. It's Steam and Iron, and they kind of mash two game design ideas together, and it works overall pretty well. It's a really compelling and fun game, but there are definitely drawbacks, and I think that's one of them.
I think resources was something that the game seems to lack as well. Like, I mean, all these colonies that we took, it's good and all taking these colonies, but then there's no real sort of advantage to it. I mean, sure, you gain the naval base and you gain a little bit of an increase in funds, but I think RTW, I think it really needs resources. Like, say, for example, I don't know, you control somewhere in the Congo. Say that you have a rubber resource there, and then, I don't know, somehow rubber is used in your ship construction, and then you could trade on the international market. I think it needs to go deeper. It needs to go, like, bloody Inception deeper into the strategic element and the design element. So you can imagine just how much that would affect your decisions with designs. Like, say, you're using a steel, and then you have to produce that steel, but say your industries don't produce enough, you have to secure that element, and say you don't like the British, but you have to buy your upper lip and then buy steel from them as France.
It does kind of simulate that somewhat. It simulates it abstractly, at least industrial limitations. If you're France and you go and you build like 20 battleships all at once before you go broke, you will see that there are steel shortages and other things like that you won't get if you don't build as much. So I think it does simulate local economy to some extent, but it is abstract. I think if they're going to do Rule the Waves 2, like they're talking about, and they're talking about bringing it into World War II, I have two big concerns. One, I don't think the current combat engine really will handle air combat at all effectively. My second concern is that you're going to have more control over where you fight and your overall fighting of the war, because World War I is fine to say like, oh, these random events, and there's not really much tactical direction that the Navy gives to where you're going to fight, because that's kind of how that war resulted. Or it was, focused around the colonies, like when Russia and Japan fought in the Russo-Japanese War. But if you're trying to play Rule the Waves into World War II, which is what they're talking about, you're going to have to your point, XTRG, you're going to have to be able to say, as Japan, I need you to go after the Dutch East Indies because we need oil to funnel, to fuel our economy. You're going to have to say, I need you to go after, different sections in the map. You're going to need more control. It can't just be random or scripted. Because if it's scripted, it'll just play out the exact same way every single time. And if it's random, it won't at all model the way that war was fought in World War II. Like, you've got to be able to give some tactical direction to where the war is going to be fought. Otherwise, it'll just be really bizarre, I think.
Yeah, I would say that resources might be a little bit outside the complexity for just one developer.
Maybe, I'm not saying you necessarily have to say like, oh, you produce this much tonnage and you have to sign this trade deal. Because like even that, like if you're saying limitation of scope, you're right. It's probably beyond the game's capabilities. But at the very least, this area produces oil, which the game does. And you need to be able to say, I need to go get that, or I need to go, do this or do that. It needs more than it has now. Maybe not quite all the way to the level of tonnage being produced and signing specific trade deals, but it needs to at least account for resources and scarcity based on your empire and where you're located.
Yeah, definitely. I think this kind of brings us into the second question we've had asked, which is just what are we looking forward to about Rule of Waves 2? And I would we've already said the things I'm interested in. I want automation of some fights so that we can play more strategically. And there was another one. Somebody else go, and I'll come back.
I'm not looking forward to World War II. Is it bad if I say I'm not looking forward to that? I would actually much rather the game start in like 1880 or 1870. I think this engine would handle an early start. So actually what I will say is if the game goes to 1945, fine. I mean, I'm sure the developer will figure out a way to make it work. I think what would be more exciting to me is if it starts a little bit earlier too, because it's really interesting if you look at the ship designs from I think this game shines at a surface level engagement simulator, which is what I worry about. I mean, I suppose, air combat, if you're smarter than me, which the developer obviously is, he can figure out how to make it work. But, submarine combat doesn't work as well in this game because it's really a surface combat game, right? To your point, I think it was Tortuga, you said you've only seen a submarine fire at a ship once with torpedoes. Well, if it's World War II, that's going to have to change to some extent. So you're going to have to make submarines a bigger part. You're going to have to make air a bigger part. But if you start in like 1880, there is this whole sort of ironclad ram surface ship design element. And then you've got the Royal Sovereign, which is the first of the pre-dreadnought ships, which is almost like a dreadnought in of itself in that it revolutionizes the way that ships are designed. They go from these, completely bizarre designs in this sort of ram mentality or almost like a old ship of the line mentality to a modern battleship design, but with limited main guns. And then in 1905 with the Dreadnought, you have another revolution. I think what gets missed often enough is that early, 1890s design revolution that happened was just, in my opinion, if you look back at those designs, was just as influential to ship design as the Dreadnought was. So I think if you could capture an earlier turning point, you could have a like 1880 to 1940, and you get that rapid, development change in 1890. You get that rapid development change in 1905, and then you kind of get that rapid development change in the interwar period where aircraft start to become, really powerful in the whole naval combat realm. So I think what's exciting to me is capturing more change, because I think that's what this game does a really good job about, is it captures the rapid technological development change and the influence that has on surface combat or naval combat in general. And being able to do that more than just once, where you're starting and you're going to be obsolete in 5 years, being able to have multiple turning points in that, I think is the most interesting piece to me. And wow, that was a long-winded way of saying it.
I like the point that you made about the earlier technological revolutions. I mean, when you do have the rise, the appearance of the ironclads, I can't remember the quote now, I can't remember who said it, but it was a quote of something like, once the ironclad emerged, Britain went from having over 100 first-rate ships to only having 2, and they were the ships that were clad in iron.
Yeah.
So you see this gigantic shift in just geopolitics. I mean, the American Civil War with the ironclads, that really did send out seismic shockwaves when it came to naval affairs.
Yeah, but to our friends across the channel, they were already building, the French and the British were building ironclad ships first, to be fair, if we're being honest. They were better, too. They were actually ocean-going ships. Ours had a tendency to sink.
They did okay. I like the rams, the Confederate rams. I just love the fact that it's like it's interesting. You have that ironclad ship using like antiquity tactics. Basically the triremes ramming into other ships and quinqueremes. It's something. It's like full circle. So interesting.
Well, you know what they say: if at first you don't succeed, ramming speed.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, I would say one other thing. I remembered it. Nations fighting other nations. That's something it's kind of missing on in the original, in this Rule of the Waves. You go to war with other people, but there's no simulation of other nations fighting other nations. And there's not really a good like world war feel to it, because the most you can get is if you're allied with somebody, you can go to war with one other person. And then if you get lucky, tensions will mount enough with another and they'll join, but that resets the victory point count. So the multi-nation wars are not handled very well right now. And that's something I would be looking forward to.
I think you have to do that if you're doing World War II, right? I mean, like,
yeah,
I would say that for World War
yeah.
I also, but World War I, at the very least, from a naval combat perspective, was mostly Britain versus Germany, right? Like, if we're being honest about World War I's naval, outside of the first couple months, and yeah, there was some stuff that went on in the Mediterranean, but really, it was like Austria versus France in the Mediterranean with some British assistance, and it was, and then later Italy, and it was really Britain versus Germany in the North Atlantic, and you could get away with a one-on-one approach when it was the naval combat wasn't as dynamic in terms of the powers involved. Whereas, and I know I'm giving short shrift to the Russians and the Germans in the Baltic, but still in most scenarios it was 1v1. Whereas in World War II, like you've got a lot more contestants with a lot more even naval power. You've got Britain versus Germany. You've got the U.S. versus Japan and Germany. You've got the Dutch in there. You've got the French in there for a while. You know, I think it's a more dynamic war, and if you're going to really cover it and cover it well, you're going to have multi-nation wars, to your point.
It's going to be interesting to see the aspects of carriers, like how are carriers going to be playing a role here. I mean, like, you obviously have the seaplane carriers, and then you have like these sort of true carriers. Like at the start of the war, the British did have aircraft carriers, and they were used in an anti-submarine warfare role, which turns out didn't really work too well, did it? Now, so yeah, this is going to be a really interesting aspect. I do think with Rule the Waves 2, I don't know about World War II. I kind of feel like a Cold War setting might have worked out well, where you had the anti-ship missiles. I feel like that would have been something a little bit easier to model. So you could obviously have your ship missiles or your guns or something. So you'd still have the revolution in terms of ship design. So you could start, let's say, in 1945 or 1946, and then as you go through another technological revolution, the electronic revolution, so to say.
So what you want is like command modern air naval operations to create like a diplomatic ship design phase. Because command, I don't know if either of you played that game, but it's basically it's like the successor to Harpoon, and it covers from 1946, I believe, to present day. But it's just a battle engine. It's almost like Steam and Iron was for this, except for modern ship combat.
Pretty much.
I'm in the process of learning it, so
yeah,
I don't know much about it yet.
It can take a little bit of time. It's certainly, you know, it's a very big game. But yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I keep doing that.
No, it's fine. I'm trying to learn that game, CMN-AO. It's just, I load it up and then I end up doing something and then I forget. But have you tried War in the Pacific by Gary Grisby?
Yes. I've been in a PBM with I don't know if either of you go to Belugan Campaign's site at all, but I've been doing a PBEM with him. I'm into like August of 1942 as Japan, and my merchant convoys are feeling the wrath of his cruiser rating, which is not very historical, but certainly destroying my ability to support my forward forces.
The Wrath of Khan.
Basically.
We have a question here. How would you keep the Cold War from going nuclear? Well, it's one of those things. Would you really use a... I suppose there was a lot of ideas floating around of using nuclear weapons against fleets, but it'd be really, really bloody difficult. I mean...
Yeah, I think the question is how do you limit it to tactical, right? Because like once you go strategic, game over. It's all over. But if you keep it with tactical weapons like nuclear torpedoes or nuclear depth charges, you could still keep the game interesting. I don't know how feasible it is from a strategic level, but
it's something that's hard to say because it's like, was it ever tried? It's never happened, has it? You've never seen nuclear weapons deployed in a anti-ship role.
Well, they tested them, right? I think they tested.
Oh, the American tests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean they were on ships. The Russian submarines that were trying to get into Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis had nuclear torpedoes on them as well. But they were never used, obviously.
So
Thank God. Know. Well, we wouldn't be here if they were, so in all likelihood, anyway.
Yeah, I think what you'd have to do, though, with a Cold War sort of game is basically have it... is it DEFCON 3 where conventional arms is basically allowed? Is it DEFCON 3?
The DEFCON whole... Yes, I think you're right, but the DEFCON structure just doesn't make any sense to me because the U.S. is bombing people at DEFCON 4. Like, I think we're at DEFCON 4 or whatever during the Iraq War, and that, you know, I don't...
Bombing? You mean liberating?
I mean, we were attacking other enemy forces, regardless of whether your political views say we should do it or not. I'm just saying that we were weapons-free at a DEFCON 4 status.
Definitely.
That's a little bit... Oh, we kind of drifted a little bit off the rule waves topic.
Wait, what?
Didn't we? I don't know if there's any other questions, actually, but I might have to get going pretty soon here.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody coming out. I definitely enjoyed the chat. I know one question someone asked in the pre-period was that, are there any other games that we would consider doing a Succession series for. I mean, I'm open to it. I think we've talked about maybe Crusader Kings or EU or something like that. I'm not an expert at either of those games, though I have them. You know, it depends on. I don't want to put anyone on the spot being like, "Will you play a game with me?" But you know, I think I would be interested in another series, even if it's Rule the Waves.
I think the Crusader Kings lends itself extremely well to a Succession series because it itself is a Succession game. It's like the most appropriate for a Succession series. And I don't think it's as hardcore as Europa Universalis, so there can be a little bit of humor involved, which means that we can allow XTRG to play, and we don't have to worry about things falling apart under his reign.
Wow.
Wow. Apply cold water to the burn there.
What's the equivalent in Crusader Kings of a ship that only has guns firing forward?
I don't know. Maybe
The best ship.
I don't know. But we should also talk about any future plans we have coming up. You can probably pitch something on, like Historical Gamer. Right now you're doing the Civil War stuff.
I kind of feel like my channel's become the Ultimate General channel series lately, because Ultimate General Civil War is in early access, and I've been playing the hell out of that game. I enjoy it a lot.
It's so good.
It is. It's really good. My main gripe with it is I always see, like, when you're on the Confederate side and you're fighting the Union, they're just like charging you like zombie hordes, and that's not at all how the war was fought. There was very little melee, so that's a slight, you know, I see it and I just twitch a bit. But outside of that, it is a brilliant game, and I've been playing a lot of that. Chancellorsville and Stones River just came out, so I was actually streaming that last night at like 5 in the morning because I went to bed at 7 and woke up at 2. But yeah, a lot of Civil War 2, and I'm not
Do you
quite
have anything like naval oriented you think you'll be on your channel in the upcoming?
naval oriented.
We can always do another Succession series.
We could. What I would like to do is I just picked up a book on the U-boat. There's a book I got at Half Price Books that's called U-Boat Diaries or something like that, and it's just like 500 pages of the captain's like log in the ships from all the different U-boat, a lot of different U-boats in World War II. So not even like sailor diaries, but just, you know, contact report, that kind of thing, what their actual logs were. And it's
what kind of logs are we talking? Oak or birch?
So, like, you know, the captain says like 900 hours, you know, enemy freighter sighted, whatever, and then like 1915, you know, basically just, you know, the play-by-play of the ship's actions throughout the day. So to me, that's interesting. And what I would think would be really cool is, and I don't know if there's a lot of, I haven't really looked too in depth with it yet, but what I think would be neat would be doing like a Silent Hunter or a series where you kind of incorporate like realistic U-boat life and build your own like captain's diary type deal, and maybe a little bit more edited function where it's, you show the gameplay, but you also talk about, you know, some history, build in some like fake sort of crew interaction, those kind of things, and you talk about it almost like an actual diary for a captain. I think that would be really interesting. I think that would require a lot more time than I have right now, but it is something that's on my wish list to do.
Have either of you actually played Aurora 4X?
I have not. I've heard about it.
Yes. This is not really naval, though, right?
Oh, it's
Space navies.
Space navies, yes.
I mean, it does the design just brilliantly. It's definitely something that does play in for like something like Succession series. There's just so many ways to tailor it, but the level of design is absolutely incredible. So I think it would make for something quite good for a Succession series. I'm trying to think now how to.
Actually, one of my viewers recommended Aurora as well, saying that the ship design, even though it's space, his opinion was it was much better than Rule the Waves as a game.
Oh my god, yes.
It's one of the best. I mean, Aurora 4X is an incredible game. The only problem is the appeal is limited, since it's not just, it's basically Rule the Waves, except for there's no steam and iron portion. You just look at spreadsheets.
But it's tactical battles. I mean, you do fight your battles, and they can.
There's no visuals, right?
Yeah, there is. There's visuals of seeing your enemies like literally.
I mean, I played Out of the Park Baseball on my channel, and that's just like a text sim basically as well, and a lot of people enjoy it.
Yeah. It's a really good game. I would love a Succession series on that too.
I would need to. Is it freeware, or how much does it cost?
Yeah, it's actually free.
Right.
Yeah, it's free. It's being worked on at the moment. He's the designer is only a single designer, so when you say one designer can't do it all, well, this man can. Anyway, I believe he's working on a version of it where it's going to run on C++ or C++ or something like that. The issue with Aurora 4X at the moment is like over time there's so much going on that it will run to a crawl, but with the new version it should be a lot more efficient. But yeah, it's design is incredible in there, especially with how weapons work. For example, you have your laser weapons, and they have like a sort of cone of fire. So, like with a laser, it's a single fire, so you can see the armor profiles of your ships. And like the thicker the armor, the more armor cubes you have. Basically, like you imagine a spreadsheet of cubes. Like each layer that you add increases the amount of layers. So a laser would drill through the armor, which is interesting. And then you have something like plasma bombards, where they have incredibly short range, where they're like hugely explosive firepower.
I mean, I know what you're talking about, XTRG, but I think it's going to be incredibly difficult to explain. It's a difficult game to learn.
I'll dive into it. It's interesting. I like the idea of Crusader Kings personally. Maybe you're not interested in XTRG, but I at the very least I think that would be a fun series, and I don't know if either of you are really into that, but I think we could do that. We could do an Aurora series as well. I just need to learn the game a bit before I just stumble around. We're like, what's going on?
And XTRG, what do you have going on in your channel in the upcoming month or so?
Bloody hell, what do I know?
And maybe in particular with anything with naval combat or
War in the Pacific.
Yeah, you're doing War in the Pacific. Great. That's a it's really in-depth game.
What else am
I actually want to do War in the Pacific as well, as far as like a somewhat edited, as we go through the 75th anniversary for a lot of these events. I want to do something for Midway. I want to do a few videos there, and I think War in the Pacific is the natural game to do that. Also, maybe some naval action, but it's hard to jump into necessarily. I used to play a lot of Age of Sail, so.
Atlantic Fleet, it's a nice game. I just wish it was a little bit quicker. It's like when you're playing the game and then you're doing the turns, it's really annoying, Did you find that, like, just having to end the turn, end the turn, end the turn, end the turn, just to get a little bit closer?
Yeah, I played that a lot. It was on one of my top 5 most played list for 2016. I played it a lot at the start of the year. My main issue with that is I don't think it handles subs all that well. And
no. Oh my God,
how do you fight the Battle of the Atlantic with a poor sub engine? Like, it's really interesting for the early warriors where the German fleet gets out, and I guess I've got quibbles with it. Like, surface combat doesn't make sense to be turn-based because you've got 5-inch guns on destroyers firing at the same rate of fire as 15-inch guns on battleships, which doesn't make sense. But you also, it just kind of gets really repetitive and just kind of really a bit of a slog in some of those battles.
I think it's fun to pick up for like a moment if you want to simulate the Battle of the Bismarck. You're like, I want to dive into this. I want to, live that moment in history for a moment. I think it does this well, but the campaign, an extended play of Atlantic Fleet gets very repetitive.
The idea of the campaign is superior to me, though. Like, there's so few games out there that let you simulate the Battle of the Atlantic, and I want there to be more games. I just wish this did a better job of it.
True.
Well, I'll just say on mine, I'm about to do another Rule the Wave series as well. I'll be playing as Japan this time. And then actually XTRG and I are thinking about doing War in the East if I ever find the time to play it. But these Gary Grigsby's games are just, they're not trivial.
Which one of you is going to play as Germany?
Oh,
we haven't
me.
decided that yet.
Okay, well then if XTRG is Germany, then you can start a War in the West game with me, and I'll be the Western allies all at the same
That'd be
time.
hilarious.
They're actually, apparently Gary Grigsby's trying, like, that's their long-term vision. Who knows if they'll ever get there, but they're going to release a new War in the East, and either maybe not this year but next year, I think. And then they want to take that engine, incorporate it into the most recent War in the West, and create like a gigantic War in Europe game.
Yeah, I've seen talk of War in Europe, but that's like, as far as I can tell, I don't know much. I just read like a couple posts about it. It's years off, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, the new War in the East won't be till 2018, I think. And
it usually take about 4 years.
They won't officially comment, but maybe 2018. I hope.
Yeah, right.
I mean, well, I do have a line with the developers. I have spoken to them. I'm going to try and get access to the beta when it is available, but it's going to use the logistics system from War in the West. There's actually some screenshots online where you see the air system. Let me see if I can find those right now. It's definitely looking really good.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, but I just need to learn more in the East first so that I'm comfortable with any of these Gary Grigsby games.
You'll be fine.
They're not that. I mean, I'll be honest. War in the Pacific was easier for me to pick up than the most recent War in the East. I felt like it communicated things a little bit better, even though the UI is much better in the War in the East. It was just, I feel like I didn't know what was going on.
The scope is larger in Pacific, but there's less units. I mean, it's like you had a hell of a lot less men in the Pacific theater than you did in the Eastern theater.
If you exclude China.
True.
But anyway. Yeah, XTRG, anything else other than War in the East or Tortuga? Anything else you guys are working on?
I was looking to play some Mech Warrior. I don't know, I've recently just got back into Mech Warrior. It's not really naval, is it? Unless you're going to war.
No, that's okay. It's something you're going to do, and that's fine.
Did we, when we ended the game, did it give us like you get this ship class named after you based on your
that'd be a great way to conclude is to resign. Let's resign right now.
Okay. I should probably change the input from this static image to the game. Do you really want to resign? Yes. Yes.
Do you really want to?
Wow, look at all this. Look at all these battles in here, too. Nice. I didn't realize it did that.
Pretty cool.
That's awesome.
How long has this been a thing? I've not seen this.
Yeah.
This has always been a thing, but the problem is this is only the battles that are yeah. As long as I've ever played, I remember seeing this. So
I didn't know that. Does it give you
when
any
you
input if you click on them? Yeah, apparently. Or when you hit the max end date and you decide to end the game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it only goes up to 1938, but
fleet tonnage.
Oh, look at the blue.
Look at the British. Oh my god. Oh wow.
Well, that means the Italians must suffer something similar.
Yeah, probably much less though. Yeah, because they're always smaller. They don't even have a navy yet anymore.
Well, they were destroyed twice, right? It wasn't really fair.
See, the problem with the economy chart is that doesn't make sense because you can't really take over main provinces, so you're never going to see much of a drop in economy.
I agree. That one's not significant.
Summary of ships lost. Oh, it doesn't let you sort. Great Britain, 16 battleships, 16 battle cruisers. Good lord. Italy, 4 and 7. What did we lose? 3 battleships, 3 battle cruisers, 2 battleships, pre-dreadnought. Wow.
Now, I was the lion's share of those losses as well.
We lost a lot of auxiliaries, though. All your little minesweepers. All right. Well, I thought there was a spot where it tells you like what gets named after.
Got to close one more time or something.
Admiral Historical Tortuga Gamer, Prestige 87. In recognition of our service, the Navy will name a new aircraft carrier after us. Okay.
Well, it's very fitting for Rule the Waves 2 coming up.
Yeah. Can we carry our save into Rule the Waves 2?
I doubt it.
All right.
Utoville will live again.
Well, I guess that's a fitting end point, unless either of you have any final parting words, something you want to plug.
The Dunkirk was the best ship ever designed.
Okay.
She did no wrong.
Well, I have a question for you, Historical Gamer. Are you going to be streaming after this? Because there's several people who might stick around if you
No, I've got to run. This is my last Saturday off before my classes start back up. So I will probably be on maybe really late, maybe like 1 a.m. But outside of that, I'm probably done for a while.
Okay, very good.
But I will stream probably Ultimate General, the last part of my Chancellorsville battle, some point either late tonight or sometime tomorrow. Assuming the Packers win. If they lose tomorrow, then I might be, crying.
Yeah, depressed. I understand.
But anyway. Any final words from either of you?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. Well, thanks again to everybody who. Oh, sorry.
Live long and prosper.
Indeed. Well, thanks to everybody who showed up. I appreciate all the comments in the chat. I'm going to share the stream file with both XTRG and Tortuga. So if you guys want to post it on your channel as well, feel free. Otherwise, this is the Historical Gamer with XTRG and Tortuga Power saying thanks for coming out. And until next time, bye-bye.
Take care.
Yup.